30 years ago, in a single year, the entire future of gaming was rewritten. 3 revolutions happened simultaneously, each one powerful enough to change the industry forever. But together, they created the gaming world we live in today.
Nobody tells me what I want!
To torture me over mistakes I made over a decade ago!
This is the story of 1996, the year that changed everything. Picture this. It's early 1996. Gaming is still mostly flat. 2-dimensional sprites hop across side-scrolling levels. The Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis dominate living rooms. But whispers of something revolutionary are spreading through gaming magazines and schoolyard conversations. The third dimension is coming, and nobody knows if it will work. The industry is holding its breath. Some developers are terrified. Others see unlimited potential. And 3 companies are about to place bets that will define the next 3 decades. On June 23, 1996, Nintendo launched the Nintendo 64 in Japan. And 3 months later, on September 29th, it arrived in North America. The console came with a controller that looked like nothing anyone had ever seen. 3 handles, an analog stick in the center. It was weird, it was confusing, and it was absolutely brilliant. But the real magic was in the game that launched with it, Super Mario 64. Shigeru Miyamoto and his team at Nintendo had spent nearly 2 years, from September 1994 to May 1996, building something that seemed impossible. They were creating Nintendo's first true 3D game, and they were doing it before anyone else had figured out how 3D should even work. Here's a development story most people don't know. Miyamoto's team started with a simple room made of Lego-like blocks. Mario and Luigi could run around, climb slopes, and jump. That's it. No enemies, no levels, no game. They were just trying to make the controls feel right with that analog stick. Miyamoto said once they got the controls smooth, they knew they were halfway there. The entire game was built around making movement feel perfect. The design process was beautifully chaotic. There were no detailed documents, just quick sketches and notes. The course director, Yoichi Yamada, would draw weird little doodles, and Miyamoto would say things like, "Oh, there should be a snowman here." They described it as sculpting a diorama out of clay. For example, the King Bob Ohm stage originally had a fast-flowing river that swept Mario away. Too hard. So they changed it to a desert valley, keeping the shape but adjusting the challenge. It was game design as improvisation. They even tried motion capture for Mario's animations but scrapped it. Everything was done by hand, creating a skeleton system that gave Mario his iconic movement. And here's the kicker. Miyamoto admitted they only used about 40 to 60% of the N64's capabilities in Super Mario 64. They were so focused on getting it right, they didn't even push the hardware to its limits, and it was still revolutionary. While Nintendo was perfecting 3D platforming, Sony had a problem. The PlayStation had launched in 1995 and was gaining momentum, but it lacked something crucial, a mascot. Nintendo had Mario. Sega had Sonic. Sony had nothing. Enter Naughty Dog, a small studio with a wild idea and the technical chops to pull off the impossible. Crash Bandicoot launched on September 9, 1996, and it wasn't just a great game. It was a technical marvel that shouldn't have been possible on the PlayStation's hardware. Andy Gavin, co-founder of Naughty Dog, essentially hacked the PlayStation to make it work. And the tricks they used? They became the foundation for modern game development. Here's the genius part. The PlayStation had a slow CD drive and only 2 megabytes of fast RAM. Most games of the era looked empty and sparse because they couldn't load enough detail. But Gavin created a virtual memory swapping system that divided massive levels into 64 kilobyte chunks. The game would only load the chunks Crash needed for his immediate environment, pulling them from the CD just in time. The result? Crash Bandicoot had 20 to 30 times more detail than contemporary games like Tomb Raider. If you compare them side by side, it's shocking. Then there's the animation. Crash himself used 600 of the 1,500 polygons the PlayStation could render per frame. That's 40% of the entire rendering budget on one character. But they couldn't use standard skeletal animation because it looked too stiff and robotic. So they pre-baked positional data for all 500 of Crash's vertices across every single animation. That's an insane amount of data. To make it fit, they wrote a custom compression algorithm that threw out information for vertices that barely moved. They achieved 50 to 80 to 1 compression. The result was fluid, stretchy, Warner Brothers-style cartoon animation that felt alive. Crash became Sony's unofficial mascot, the answer to Mario and Sonic. And the techniques Naughty Dog pioneered, that dynamic memory management system, became standard in every open-world game you play today. Grand Theft Auto, The Witcher, Red Dead Redemption, they all owe a debt to what Andy Gavin figured out in 1995 to make a cartoon Bandicoot spin on a CD-based console. While Nintendo and Sony were battling over 3D, something quieter but equally revolutionary was happening on the Game Boy. On February 27, 1996 in Japan, 2 games launched that almost nobody outside the company believed in: Pokémon Red and Pokémon Green. The creator, Satoshi Tajiri, had pitched the concept to Nintendo in 1990. He was a young developer on the autism spectrum with a childhood obsession, collecting insects. As a kid, he was nicknamed Dr. Bug and originally wanted to be an entomologist. But as Tokyo urbanized, the fields and ponds where he caught bugs disappeared. So he created a game that would let kids experience the same joy he had felt, the thrill of discovering, capturing, and collecting creatures. The genius was in the Game Boy's link cable. Trading Pokémon between cartridges was like trading insects between jars. It was social gaming before the internet, before online multiplayer, before any of that existed. You had to meet someone in person, connect your Game Boys, and trade. It created a real-world community. But here's the story most people don't know. Pokémon took 6 years to develop. 6 years. For a Game Boy game, Game Freak nearly went bankrupt. For several months, they barely had enough money to pay employees. Tajiri lived at his father's house and accepted no salary. The team was surviving on fumes and belief. Shigeru Miyamoto, the creator of Mario, became Tajiri's mentor, guiding him through the process. Without Miyamoto's support, Pokémon might never have been finished. When it finally launched in February 1996, it was a slow burn at first. But by the end of the year, over 1 million copies had sold in Japan. The trading card game launched in October 1996. The anime was in development. And by 1998, when Pokémon Red and Blue launched in North America, it became a global phenomenon that has never stopped. 30 years later, Pokémon is still one of the highest-grossing media franchises of all time. The way these games were marketed in 1996 feels like ancient history now. Nintendo's campaign was "Change the System," emphasizing the revolutionary controller and 3D gameplay. They sent VHS promo tapes to retailers showing off the N64's power. PlayStation's campaign was edgier. Do not underestimate the power of PlayStation with a £40 million budget. They targeted young adults, not kids, positioning the console as cool and mature. Some ads were designed for club-goers. It was a completely different audience strategy. Compare that to today. In 2026, game launches are dominated by influencers and social media. Developers interact directly with fans on Twitter and Discord. Streamers get early access and broadcast gameplay to millions. Marketing budgets are spent on sponsored streams, not TV commercials. The community builds hype through memes and viral content. And games aren't finished at launch. They're live services with ongoing updates, season passes, and microtransactions. In 1996, you bought a game, and that was it. The game was finished. Complete. You owned it forever. No patches, no DLC, no season passes. If there was a bug, you lived with it. But you also knew exactly what you were getting. Today, games are platforms. They evolve. They change. You don't own them. You license them. It's It's a fundamentally different relationship. So why does 1996 still matter 30 years later? Because it was the year gaming grew up. Super Mario 64 proved that 3D could be more than a gimmick. It could be the future. Crash Bandicoot showed that technical innovation could push hardware beyond its limits and create something beautiful. And Pokémon proved that games could be social, that they could bring people together in the real world, and that a simple idea executed with passion could become a cultural phenomenon. Every open-world game you play today uses memory management techniques pioneered by Crash Bandicoot. Every 3D platformer owes a debt to Super Mario 64's controls and camera system. And every game with collecting, trading, and social mechanics is standing on the foundation Pokémon built. These weren't just great games. They were blueprints for the future. 30 years ago, in 1996, 3 companies took massive risks. Nintendo bet that an analog stick and a plumber in 3D could redefine gaming. Sony bet that a cartoon Bandicoot could compete with Mario and Sonic. And a small team at Game Freak bet that kids would want to catch and trade digital monsters. All 3 bets paid off. And the world of gaming was never the same. So the next time you boot up a modern game, remember where it all started. Remember the year that changed everything. Remember 1996.